The man who murdered his entire family is dead.
Welcome back to Unexplained Secrets. I'm happy to see you again. Today, we dive into this enduring mystery, exploring the true crime behind the murders that stained this house's history, the terrifying stories that followed, and the questions that still remain unanswered. Is the Amityville Horror a real-life nightmare, or just another legend for the ages? Stick around and let's find out. If you find it as exciting as I do, don't forget to subscribe and give a like. I appreciate this. What would you do if you found out that the most infamous haunted house in America was built on lies? Could something so terrifying be real? Or is it all just a well-crafted story? The tale of the Amityville Horror has captured the imagination of millions, sparking debates for decades about the nature of fear, the truth of paranormal events, and the lengths to which people will go for fame and fortune. When the Lutz family moved into the seemingly innocent house at 112 Ocean Avenue in 1975, they quickly found themselves facing horrors that would become legendary in the world of paranormal activity. But was it truly haunted, or was it a terrifying hoax? Setting the stage. Before we dive into the supernatural claims, we need to understand the tragic events that set the stage for everything that followed. On the night of November 13, 1974, Ronald DeFeo Jr. committed an unimaginable crime. He killed 6 members of his own family at their home in Amityville, Long Island. His victims included his father, mother, 2 brothers, and 2 sisters. They were all found dead in their beds, shot with a rifle in what was deemed a brutal act of family annihilation. The DeFeo family had lived at 112 Ocean Avenue for years, but their lives were tragically cut short in this chilling act of violence. Ronald DeFeo was arrested shortly afterward, and during his trial, he pleaded insanity, claiming he heard voices telling him to kill his family. He was convicted of second-degree murder in 1975 and sentenced to 6 consecutive terms of 25 years to life in prison. But the house, which had once been a home filled with life, now became infamous for its dark history. In the wake of the murders, the house sat empty for nearly a year, a grim reminder of the violence that had unfolded within its walls. It wasn't long before rumors began to swirl, and the house became a topic of conversation, not only in the local community, but across the country. In December 1975, the Lutz family, George and Kathy, along with Kathy's 3 children from a previous marriage, moved into 112 Ocean Avenue. They were looking for a fresh start, and they found what they thought would be the perfect home. The price was a bargain at $80,000, likely due to the house's tragic past, but the Lutz family wasn't deterred. They had no idea, however, that they were about to become part of a terrifying story that would haunt them and the world for decades to come. At first, everything seemed normal, but as they settled into their new home, strange and unsettling things began to happen. A few weeks after moving in, George and Kathy discovered that something wasn't quite right. There were whispers, strange smells, and unsettling noises in the middle of the night. But it wasn't until after the family experienced something much darker that their lives were turned upside down, and the legend of the Amityville Horror began to take shape. The Lutz family's paranormal experiences. As George and Kathy Lutz settled into their new home, the strange occurrences they first brushed off as coincidence quickly escalated into something far more sinister. In the days following their move, they reported hearing odd noises, banging sounds in the walls, floorboards creaking in the middle of the night when no one was there. Doors that should have been locked were found wide open, and items were mysteriously moved around the house. It wasn't long before the Lutz family began experiencing disturbing visions. George, who was usually a calm, collected man, began to feel an overwhelming presence in the house. He would wake up at 3:15 every morning, the same time that the DeFeo murders were believed to have occurred. George later admitted that he felt the house had some kind of hold over him, and his personality seemed to shift. He became irritable, even aggressive, something completely out of character for him. Kathy, too, was affected. She began to have vivid nightmares, and she later claimed that she experienced strange, ghostly encounters. One of the most chilling experiences she reported was a vision of her deceased father. She saw him in the house, but when she tried to speak to him, he vanished into thin air. Other encounters were even more disturbing. Father Ralph J. Pecoraro, a Catholic priest, had been called in by a friend of George and Kathy to bless the house, a tradition that George had no prior knowledge of. When Father Pecoraro entered the home, he was immediately struck by a sense of unease. He later reported hearing a deep voice saying, "Get out," while attempting to bless the house. It was a moment so unsettling that he warned the Lutzes not to enter the second-floor bedroom, where he had experienced the voice. The priest was said to have developed blisters on his hands, similar to stigmata, after visiting the house. Despite their growing sense of dread, the Lutz family stayed, hoping the worst would pass. But the experiences only intensified. In one of the most unsettling occurrences, Kathy saw greenish-black slime oozing from the walls of the house. It was an image so horrific that, according to George, it was the final straw. The family packed their belongings and left, abandoning the house on January 14, 1976, just 28 days after moving in. They fled, never to return, and left behind all of their possessions. But even as they left the house, the paranormal events seemed to follow them. The Lutz family reported seeing eerie phenomena even at Kathy's mother's home, hundreds of miles away. They had left 112 Ocean Avenue, but the fear and the strange experiences didn't seem to end with their departure. The book and film adaptations. The Lutz family's departure from the house was not the end of the story. It was just the beginning. In the years that followed, the events of the Amityville Horror would go on to become a cultural phenomenon, largely thanks to the publication of Jay Anson's book in 1977. The book, based on the Lutz family's first-hand accounts, was an instant success, quickly becoming a bestseller. Anson's vivid descriptions of the strange happenings at 112 Ocean Avenue captured the imagination of readers, blurring the line between fact and fiction. Anson's book wasn't just about a family fleeing from a haunted house. It was about the eerie forces that seemed to possess both the house and the Lutz family. As the story spread, it sparked a heated debate between those who believed every word and those who saw it as nothing more than a cleverly crafted tale to cash in on the tragedy of the DeFeo murders. The book's success paved the way for a series of films based on the haunting, beginning with the 1979 film adaptation of the Amityville Horror. The film, directed by Stuart Rosenberg, was as much a hit as the book, starring James Brolin and Margot Kidder as George and Kathy Lutz. It brought the terrifying story of the house to the big screen, and its chilling portrayal of the Lutz family's experiences left audiences on edge. The film was so successful that it spawned numerous sequels and spin-offs, turning the Amityville story into a franchise. But as much as the book and film adaptations captivated audiences, they also raised questions about the accuracy of the events they depicted. The Lutzes did not play a direct role in the writing of the book, but they did provide 45 hours of tape-recorded interviews with Jay Anson. These tapes, which detailed their experiences, formed the basis for the book's narrative. The success of the book and the subsequent films turned the Amityville Horror into a global phenomenon. It was no longer just a terrifying story. It was an entire cultural movement. However, as the films continued to be made, the original story became further blurred with the passage of time. In some cases, the films exaggerated the events for dramatic effect, while others took significant creative liberties with the source material. The 2005 remake, for instance, took the original story and heightened the horror elements, depicting the house as a far more isolated and sinister place than the real 112 Ocean Avenue ever was. In reality, the house was in a suburban neighborhood, surrounded by other homes. The house in the 2005 film was even relocated to a different part of the country, with a new address assigned to it. Despite these changes, the story has persisted, and the Amityville Horror continues to be a staple of horror films, documentaries, and pop culture. Whether you believe in the haunting or see it as nothing more than a sensationalized tale, there's no denying the lasting impact this story has had on the genre and the public's collective imagination. Doubts and skepticism. As the Amityville Horror story gained widespread attention, a growing wave of skepticism began to surface. Critics quickly pointed out inconsistencies in the Lutz family's accounts, and some believed the entire tale was fabricated for profit. One of the most prominent voices of skepticism came from Stephen Kaplan, a well-known paranormal investigator, who was determined to expose the story as a hoax. Kaplan, along with other critics, argued that the Lutzes were simply taking advantage of a tragedy for financial gain, using the haunting as a way to sell their story and secure a book deal. The doubts intensified when William Weber, the defense attorney for Ronald DeFeo Jr., publicly claimed that the entire story was a creation made up over several bottles of wine. Weber said he had collaborated with George and Kathy Lutz in shaping the outline of the story that would eventually be published as the Amityville Horror. According to Weber, they concocted the narrative of paranormal disturbances in exchange for a lucrative book deal. This revelation raised serious questions about the Lutz's motivations. Did they experience genuine paranormal phenomena? Or were they just trying to capitalize on the dark history of 112 Ocean Avenue? The Lutzes, of course, denied these allegations, insisting that their experiences were real. George Lutz maintained that much of the book's content was based on the truth, though he admitted that some elements were exaggerated or embellished for dramatic effect. However, his defense was not enough to silence the growing chorus of critics who pointed to the inconsistencies in their story. Further undermining the Lutz's credibility were discrepancies in the timeline of their experiences. For instance, in the original version of the book, Father Pecораro's car was described as an old Ford, but in later editions, it was suddenly referred to as a Chevrolet Vega. Small details like this led some to believe that the Lutzes were changing their story to fit the narrative of a haunted house, adding to the suspicion that the events were exaggerated. To add to the controversy, the Lutzes even agreed to take polygraph tests in 1979 to validate their claims. The results, however, were inconclusive. The polygraph examiners, considered to be some of the best in the field, asserted that the tests did not show signs of deception, but skeptics argue that polygraphs are notoriously unreliable and that there's no solid evidence to prove the Lutz's version of events. As the years passed, the story of the Amityville Horror became less about what happened in the house and more about the controversy surrounding its authenticity. The DeFeo murders. The true horror? While the Lutz family's claims captured the public's attention, the real horror lies in the DeFeo murders. Ronald DeFeo Jr. shot and killed 6 members of his family in a brutal and senseless act. The psychological profile of DeFeo revealed a troubled young man, possibly suffering from mental illness, who claim to hear voices. Some argue that the violent history of the house contributed to the later paranormal claims, while others believe the murders were a tragic coincidence. What is clear is that the DeFeo murders are far more terrifying than any ghost story could ever be. The tragedy was overshadowed by the subsequent paranormal claims, and the house's violent past has been largely forgotten in the wake of the Lutz family's narrative. The Lutzes. Victims or opportunists? As the years passed, the question arose: were the Lutz family victims of a genuine haunting, or were they opportunists who created a story for financial gain? The Lutzes had recently purchased the house for a bargain price and were not financially well off. Some critics argue that they capitalized on the house's tragic past to sell a sensationalized story. Their quick departure from the house, leaving behind all their belongings, fueled the belief that they staged the escape to make their story more compelling. The legal battles they engaged in, including suing William Weber and various paranormal investigators, further raised suspicions about their motivations. George Lutz maintained that their experiences were real, even though their financial struggles and legal actions added layers of doubt. The conflict between skepticism and belief has persisted for decades, leaving the question of their authenticity unresolved. Real investigations and further controversy. Several paranormal investigators, including Ed and Lorraine Warren, sought to uncover the truth behind the haunting. In 1976, the Warrens visited the house, convinced it was haunted by malevolent spirits. Their investigation, including spiritual cleansings and the famous demonic boy photograph, further cemented the Amityville horror legend. However, skeptics, including Stephen Kaplan, accused the Lutzes and the Warrens of fabricating the story for profit. The inconsistencies in the Lutzes' accounts, along with shifting narratives, deepened suspicions about the authenticity of the haunting. The debate continues today, with many still wondering whether the Amityville horror was a real haunting or an elaborate hoax. The house today. Despite the passage of time, 112 Ocean Avenue remains a symbol of fear and fascination. The house has been renovated several times, including the removal of its distinctive quarter-round windows, which gave it an eerie appearance in the films. The address was also changed to 108 Ocean Avenue to deter curious visitors. The house still commands a premium price in the real estate market. In 2010, it sold for $950,000, despite its dark history. Local residents, however, prefer to forget the house's past and avoid discussing its haunting legacy. Conclusion: the enduring legacy. So, is the Amityville horror a true story or a carefully constructed myth? The DeFeo murders are a tragic fact, but the Lutz family's supernatural claims have been clouded by controversy. While the brutal murders of Ronald DeFeo Jr. undoubtedly shaped the house's legacy, the ghostly apparitions and paranormal phenomena that followed have captivated audiences for decades. Whether you believe the Lutz's tale or see it as a hoax, the Amityville story continues to spark fascination. Was it real or a sensationalized myth? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for more investigations into history's most enduring mysteries. Of course, I hope to see you back at the next video.